Way back in around 2013, I began to hear talk about a particular RPG Maker game that was making its way around some of the Western Let's Plays, and decided to give it a go myself. I immediately fell in love with its creative style and storytelling and the characters held within. Ib, a game by Kouri released in 2012, features players controlling the titular character trapped in an otherworldly art museum, meeting companions Gary and Mary along the way. Their collective objective is to escape the museum and return to reality. It was developed using the RPG Maker 2000 engine and is considered a cult classic and influential in the sphere of indie horror adventure games. A remake with updated features, new dialogue, and some changed puzzles released in 2022. Today on the Panopticon Theatre, I won't be necessarily exploring the game itself or the main story, but I want to see what we can figure out about the mysterious figure in the background of the whole game, who we're told very little about, the painter himself, Guertena. Just to preface, we'll be looking at both the original and remake versions of the game today. Ib, a 9-year-old girl, visits an art gallery with her mother and father to view an exhibition by the late multidiscipline artist Vice Guertena. As Ib's parents check in, she wanders into the gallery by herself to look around. She can't read a lot of the words in the painting's titles due to her young age. After a short while of walking, she suddenly finds the gallery empty, dark, and locked. Strange things begin to happen, and she falls into the abyss of the deep painting, finding herself in the fabricated world. She finds a red rose that is tied to her life and represents the player's health. Traveling through the now massive gallery, Ib must solve puzzles to move ahead and avoid or deal with some of the artworks, which now seem to have come to life with malicious intent. Eventually, she encounters a collapsed man who has a blue rose. Once she saves him, he introduces himself as Gary, another patron of the gallery who's become trapped here. He's older than Ib, and will travel with her through the gallery, helping her with puzzles and helping her understand the words she can't read. After some stressful puzzles, including one where she sees a painting of her parents, Ib collapses and sleeps for a while, though it is troubled. Gary takes care of her, gives her a piece of candy, and they bond a little. Shortly after, they bump into a young blonde girl who's also looking to get out. Her name is Mary, and she has a yellow rose. She immediately latches onto Ib, wanting to be her friend. The trio encounter a room with cute rabbits, but for some reason Gary seems uncomfortable. A book in the room discusses how hallucinations could arise from too much suffering in the mind. They're then separated by a painting, with Ib and Mary on one side and Gary on the other. The girls move on ahead. When we switch back to Gary, we can see why he was so uncomfortable in the rabbit room. What he sees is creepy blue dolls. During some puzzles, Gary uncovers in a book about Guertena's works that Mary is actually Guertena's last ever painting. Some paintings overhear this and relay what Gary found to Mary in the other section. Mary starts acting odd and somewhat violent around Ib, and also starts asking her about real-world things. When Gary finishes his side of the puzzle, Mary's trying to push a statue and Ib goes to leave, but Mary approaches her in a threatening manner, having been left behind. Gary moves between them before anything can happen. He tells Ib about Mary's secret, and they leave her. The two find themselves in a crayon sketchbook area of the gallery, in which they have to solve more puzzles. Despite being crayon, it seems to appear mostly normal to Gary from his dialogue, though he comments that it's weird in several ways, like smelling of crayon. Ib starts seeing scary visions, like herself hanging like some of the dolls in the game. They go looking for a key to leave and find a toy box which apparently contains it, but Mary appears and pushes them in. At this point, the game splits into various endings depending on things you've done throughout. We'll just look at the ending most people consider the true one here. Leaving the toy box, the two find large yellow roses covering a door, which they have to burn to get through. Inside, Mary runs at them to get them to leave, but they run forward, finding Mary's empty painting, and have to burn that too. Mary crumbles to dust. Gary's hurt his hand on the broken glass, and Ib gives him her handkerchief, which he's had since the start of the game. They find themselves in a dark version of the gallery and head to the fabricated world painting, which implies they will lose their memory of the time there. Gary jumps into the painting, but Ib's mother suddenly appears behind them and calls her over. Gary reaches out a hand and pulls Ib through to the real gallery. Ib wanders the real gallery and finds Gary. He initially doesn't remember, but he sees he still has the handkerchief and remembers Ib. He promises to bring back her handkerchief when it's cleaned and see her again. So, the general story of Ib is pretty straightforward. What I'm most interested in is Guertena and the strange background hints you can pick up throughout the game about what's going on with him and the world. One major thing that you might not have taken in, I certainly didn't really notice on my first playthrough, is it seems the game actually takes place after the year 6235. Now this can mean different things. Either the game takes place far in the future, or in another world where a different calendar system is being used. We obviously only see the inside of the gallery, but I wouldn't say there's any particular markers of it being set in the future. But it's hard to say either way. We don't know exactly how long Guertena's been dead, but his paintings are marked from 6,198 to 6,235. Mary is stated to be his last painting, but her date is listed as question marks, so we don't know exactly when she's from, nor do we know how long after his last marked painting he died, or when the exhibit takes place. Guertena could have died years before the game takes place, or only weeks, we can't say. There's also the question of where the game takes place. Despite the original being in Japanese, it's almost certainly not set in Japan. There are no real-world place names mentioned, so we'll have to use hints. The names are a good one. Gary and Mary are both very Western European names, of course. Most people assume the name Ebe to be from the name Eve, which is probable, but as translator VG Person points out, it's spelled weird even in Japanese too. Normally you'd write the name Eve as Ibu, but it's written as Ivu. It's possibly the same name, just changed perhaps. Names of course can change and warp over time. Gary too is a slightly odd spelling, though not unseen, though again as VG Person says, it's more probably meant to be pronounced Gary. As for Guertena, that's an odd one too. Weiss is German for white, and Guertena in the original, is commonly assumed to be a reference to the painting Guernica by Pablo Picasso, who of course was Spanish. The fashion is also more typically Western Euro, and the art style is vague enough that we can't really tell races. Overall, I'd put a guess that if this is meant to be set in the real world, it's set somewhere in the Western Europe area, though it's hard to be specific exactly where. I do personally think it's another world though, going by the oddities of names and the calendar mismatch. We only get small tidbits of information about Guertena throughout. For example, we know from the description of his painting Juggling that he had a grandchild who was old enough to go to the circus in or before 6,223. We can only assume that he also had children and a family then. He was painting for at least 37 years if we look at the dates, so he was at least older than that. Relatedly, some theorized in the early stages of Eve's popularity that Gary was Guertena's mentioned grandchild, which is why he was drawn into the painting world. Technically this could be possible. Going by the artwork dates, if Juggling was painted 12 years ago, and we assume the grandchild was 10 or above at the time of the circus trip, they would be in their 20s now, as Gary seems to be. That is of course assuming it is exactly the year 6,235 at this point. However, beyond the dates kind of lining up, there's very little evidence for this. Most importantly, Gary says nothing in particular about juggling, which if this was something he remembered from his childhood, he'd probably mention, and he otherwise makes absolutely no comments that could be construed as him having this relation, at least as far as I can find. He could still be a relative, of course. If it's not exactly 6,235 and instead is a later year, then he could be a great, or even further grandchild. There's still really nothing in the game to actually support this though. What I do think is there is some connection to Eve and Gary through Guertena in spirit in a quite literal sense. Guertena's works are given life through spirit, as he puts in what is assumed to be his diary. It's said that spirits dwell in objects into which people put their feelings. I've always thought that, if that's true, then the same must be true of artwork. So today I shall immerse myself in work so as to impart my own spirit into my creations. This concept can be seen in many cultures and religions across the world, the idea that one's spirit can be imparted into their creations or to objects they have a significant personal connection to. This seems to be where the magic of the gallery comes from. All the artwork is imbued with Guertena's spirit, some perhaps more intensely than others, and thusly each is uniquely affected by Guertena's life, personality and feelings at the time of their creation. With this perspective, we can understand a little more about Guertena's life. From A Well-Meaning Hell, a painting that is quite front and centre at the start of the game, we can assume Guertena grew up with great pressure to succeed. The child in the image is playing piano, another fine art kind of pursuit. Personally, I think Guertena grew up in a rather rich family. It's stated that he wasn't a massively popular artist in life, but women would chase him for his inheritance. That's family money, not from his work. He really seems to dislike these women and what they represent. The lady in red and her sister colours are some of the most prevalent and aggressive enemies in the game, and likewise, the death of the individual statues are on a pretty similar level of prominence and seem to target a similar type of person. But rather than depicting the woman who went after him for his money, these seem to me to represent the people of society who are entirely driven by appearances with no care for personality or individuality. There was apparently supposed to be a male version of them too, but that didn't make it into the game. By the way, their original name in Japanese is Mukose, which sort of means no personality. I like the translation of their name though, it's very fitting. In general, it seems that Guertena comes from a high society youth, but has a very negative view of it. A lot of his paintings have a sense of loneliness or even violence to them, suggesting a generally pretty negative worldview, whereas his works with a more positive vibe have a more dreamy, otherworldly sense to them. There is a suggestion that he found love at some point though. Tristat the Death is the biggest suggestion towards this. It's close to his single self-portrait in the Hidden Dungeon, suggesting it could be something particularly close to his heart, but more than that, just by its sheer size and presence in the world compared to many other works, it's clearly one he spent a lot of time on. You can find a note with a very interesting entry that Gary will not explain to Eve too, that suggests a physical relationship. Of course, as he has a grandchild, it's clear he had a family at some point, but whether this is the same person, I'm not sure. Traced after death suggests to me that he felt he couldn't be with this person. If you allow me a little pretentious speculation, I think the fact that the man is depicted as a skeleton suggests to me that he feels he couldn't be with someone so full of life when he himself was so gloomy and negative. Or perhaps it represents how he was unable to be with this person in this life, perhaps due to interference by his family if she was not the person they wanted him to marry, and he felt they could only be together in death. Aside from juggling, Guertena never painted anything relating to anyone else specific in his personal life, and that, alongside paintings like Heart and Custody, suggests at least to me that whoever he did marry, it wasn't someone he had that level of deep connection with. That is of course just speculation. There is, however, a potential personal connection to Guertena I do want to explore if you'll allow me a moment to delve into deeper speculation here, and that is Eve, or perhaps Eve's mother. We don't know much about Eve's family. The only thing we can kind of tell is that they seem to be fairly rich. Eve's mother has brown hair, red eyes, and pale skin, and her father has brown hair, blue eyes, and ever so slightly darker skin. Eve herself has brown hair, red eyes, and pale skin just like her mother. The reason I mention this is that a few of Guertena's works that feature women have these exact same features. Of course, the most noticeable is the lady in red, who greatly resembles Eve and her mother, in particular with that rare feature of red eyes, but there's also the bride and Trist after death itself, plus a few others. But there does seem to be a level of connection here. Other works often include women in red dresses or general critiques of high society women. I'm absolutely not saying that Eve is the illegitimate child of Guertena, or that he and Eve's mother did indeed have a tryst of some kind, or something of the sort. It is possible, of course. We don't know how old Eve's mother is, and although she's probably younger than Guertena, it's possible their paths crossed in life if Guertena did indeed die recently. If so, it would certainly explain her particular interest in his work. Alternatively, we could be seeing Guertena's association with her grandmother or something. But little in the text beyond these visual connections support it, so I'm not going to say that is 100% the case. But I do think it's very possible there is a familial connection of some form. However, I don't necessarily think that's why Eve was drawn into the gallery, nor Gary. Guertena's gallery is built on his spirit and personality, and as such I personally think those that are drawn in are those that somehow match that spirit. It seems to be the case that Mary and the other works can actually draw people in themselves, and I suspect they may have chosen people based on the similarity to Guertena in some ways. Eve is a kid from a rich family like Guertena was. She also seems to be someone who, despite very quickly getting along with Gary and Mary, isn't much for talking. A lot of her dialogue options are either very short, or to be completely silent, or just staring. She can also make a few jokes that are circumstantially a bit out of place, like telling Gary she's not there when he calls to her in the dark. It's cute and silly, but in the somewhat dire situation, it's really not the time for that sort of thing. To me, I think Eve gets along with the other two so easily due to the situation. She and Gary are thrown into a very dangerous situation where they have to very quickly learn to work together for them to survive, and Gary as the adult has to take on a protector role. So they're almost forced to quickly skip the early stages of friendship and become quite close. As for Mary, obviously her second main goal beyond escaping the gallery is to gain friends, so she pretty much throws herself at Eve despite Eve's rather short initial greetings. Though Eve does say she has friends outside the gallery to Mary, the impression I get is that she's someone who's bad at expressing herself and communicating with others. She's very smart and very sweet, but perhaps like Guertena, she struggles to connect with the people around her. She seems a little flat even in her emotional expression. Gary comments on how fearless she seems and that she doesn't react as much as he does to scary events. It's only on occasion that she really seems to express her feelings when things get really dire. A red rose can symbolize many things: love, passion, energy, almost always positive, intense feelings. The other two's rose colors seem to represent them pretty well, but these themes don't seem to necessarily apply to the reticent Eve, unless of course she's very passionate on the inside, but can't express that on the outside. So to me, even though she does have friends and she gets along with the other two, I wonder if she finds it very difficult to connect on a deep level and express herself like others do. Maybe Guertena was the same. He seems to put all his feelings into art after all. As for Gary, it's actually a little clearer. It's harder to notice in the English version and a bit hard to explain if you don't know how this works in Japanese, but Gary talks in a very traditionally feminine way. He's referred to as a man in several places, but the way he says the personal pronoun I is atashi, which is a pretty solidly feminine personal pronoun, though certain male groups will use it, such as some gay men. His speech in general is quite feminine. As I said, much harder to notice in English, though I do think VG Person did a pretty solid job on the translation, but it seems a pretty deliberate choice, and Kerry has even said that Gary's someone who'd like to cross the barriers of gender after drawing him in a woman's styled kimono. The blue rose can represent things like mystery and magic, and they're also something that cannot be achieved in nature, and as such have to be dyed into being. perhaps this is Gary's situation. He's someone who crosses the common boundaries of self-expression, a self-made person who's very unique in his style and presentation. He's also someone who's very quick to jump to anger and instinctive reactions if the player allows him. He can kick the mannequin head and dolls, and of course his reaction to the Mary reveal is honestly very unprompted and aggressive, assuming that she's suddenly a danger. Which is not exactly wrong, but also a very quick switch up for someone who was previously travelling with no issue. He's instinctually aggressive, perhaps suggesting he's had to stand up for himself a lot in life. He too states he has friends, but also in various places he seems to have this negative, somewhat gloomy outlook, particularly when he's talking to himself in the doll room. And though he reassures Eve, it does seem that for a good portion of the game he doesn't actually believe they can get out. To me, Gary matches Guertena's somewhat depressing, hopeless outlook in this manner, whilst also connecting to his uniqueness of expression. Gary with his gender presentation, Guertena in his unique art. It's possible that both could be considered outcasts of their society, with Guertena not getting along with the high society world he was born into, and Gary expressing himself in a way a lot of the rest of the world might not quite get. Mary, on the other hand, I think represents everything Guertena doesn't see in himself. She's bright, bubbly, outgoing, openly able to act childish in a way a well-meaning Hell suggests he might not have been able to. She's very innocent, clearly not exposed to the horrors of the world outside. I don't see Mary as a villain in the story. Much like Eve and Gary, all she wants is to leave, and the only way she can is by hurting someone else. And she even tries to avoid that by having Gary be trapped in the doll room, out of his mind but unhurt. All she wants is to live in the real world and have friends, experiencing all the things she's read about. She has no ill will towards Gary or Eve, but she needs to do what she can to live the life she wants to. Yellow roses symbolize jealousy, but also cheerfulness and friendship, which is very fitting. She may be a little strange, but in reality she's also just a little girl. She thinks of Guertena as her dad, and calls out to Gary when she gets scared, and wants to eat sweets with Eve in the real world. I feel pretty bad for her, actually. Mary as Guertena's last painting could mean a few things. Either he created her as a representation of all the things he didn't see in the world, or in his older age he started to have a lighter view of things, particularly in seeing his younger family members like his grandson, who he seemed to have a particular connection to. Anyway, that's kind of all we can figure out, really. When it comes down to it, this has all just been true speculation. There's little to no actual information about Guertena in the game. Honestly, this might be my most speculative video so far, but I think it's fun to look at what little information we have and try and figure stuff out. I think Eve's a really great game for many reasons, but that very subtle world building is really interesting to me. I hope you can forgive the more theoretical nature of this video. Did you interpret it differently? Do you think there's something I missed that might give us more information on Guertena or the world behind the main story of Eve? Let me know in the comments, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching today's Panopticon Theatre performance. What do you think? Did I miss anything? What do you want me to talk about next? Make sure to sub and join the audience if you want to see more.